In the same way as before, the episode starts out with a flashback to the Last Supper dinner. "Will you lay down your life for me?" Jesus asks a question that is both profound and profoundly simple. It is a riveting beginning that immediately fills the program with a sense of urgency throughout its whole. I have no idea how long these flash forwards will continue to be effective, but up to this point, it has been a creative decision that has been supported by strong inspiration. During the beginning of the episode, the interaction that takes place between Jesus, played by Jonathan Rumi, and Peter, played by Shahar Isaac, is an excellent example of the chosen. Within the context of the church, the story of Peter proclaiming his allegiance to Jesus is frequently portrayed as boastful Peter, which is suggestive of a brash disciple who has a tendency to speak in a manner similar to that of an armchair quarterback. When it comes to the exchange, the chosen brings a great deal more emotional energy. Peter is affected by what appears to be a lack of trust in him on the part of Jesus, and it is clear that Jesus is saddened by Peter's final departure from him. Due to the fact that it is such a moving and skillfully performed moment, one cannot help but imagine how extremely distressing the future consequences will be. At the conclusion of the opening segment, a dramatic summary of the gospel is presented. According to Jesus, greater love has no one than this, than someone laid down his life for his friends. When Peter responds, "Then that's what we'll do," Jesus corrects him by saying, "That is what I will do." This is the appropriate way to begin the episode. The first scene is a flash forward, and then it is followed by a flashback to a scene that takes place immediately before Thomas leaves for the location where Jesus performed his first miracle. Although the approach makes sense from a narrative and thematic one, it is a little bit difficult to start the show with two non-linear scenes that set the tone for the episode. In light of the fact that the scenario mostly serves as a remembrance of happier times between Thomas and Rama's parents, I'm not entirely certain that it is required. This does, however, serve as a good backdrop for some of the more memorable incidents that occur later in the show. A jarring cut that breaks an emotional moment between Rama's parents occurs as the episode immediately switches back to the main chronology with a brief image of a wheat field. It is a profound tie-in to Jesus' speech in the previous episode about losing one's life to find it, and it is the kind of nuanced visual storytelling that raises The Chosen to a higher level than many other faith-based stories. In addition, it contains a powerful connection to the previous episode. Joey Vahidi, an actor, delivers an emotionally affecting portrayal as Thomas. The method in which the show has been able to humanize the disciples is one of the show's strengths up to this point. It has always been a little unjust to refer to the disciple as doubting Thomas because it defines the disciple based on a single deed. That eventual moment has been given a tremendous deal of subtlety thanks to the show's extensive efforts. Yes, it is possible to argue that the decision to develop entire narratives and characters in order to explain that one defining exchange is excessive. This is comparable to the fact that Star Wars created an entire prequel movie in order to explain the presence of the exhaust port flaw in the Death Star. However, the internal disagreement appears to be well-deserved and plausible. Despite the fact that the Bible does not provide a backstory, there was a backstory. The conversations that take place between Thomas and Rama's parents are among the most memorable parts of the episode. On the other hand, the encounter that takes place between Thomas and his mother is especially heartbreaking and professionally performed. In addition to displaying his ability as a dramatic actor in the beginning of the show, Peter also offers some comedic relief during a sermon that did not go as planned. The situation is not only humorous, but also significant at the same time. Those who are well-versed in the Bible are aware that he is not too far removed from delivering one of the most influential sermons in the history of the English language. When compared to how forcefully he preaches when he is filled with the Holy Spirit, it will be beneficial to compare and contrast his early attempts at preaching, which were a complete failure, with his subsequent preaching efforts. Additionally, one of the most heartwarming moments in the show is when Andrew offers his enthusiastic brotherly love and encouragement by saying, "I've never been more proud of you." The climax of this episode, which was hinted at in the episode before it, is what elevates it to an even higher level than it already was. Jesus is mainly missing in the second episode, despite the fact that he had a pivotal role in the first episode. The ultimate appearance of his character is the catalyst for one of the most dramatic sequences in the program. Over the course of the past few years, the cleansing the temple narrative has emerged as a favorite proof text among Christians as a means of justifying their fury. There have been numerous representations of the event in the film industry that have portrayed Jesus' actions as a knee-jerk reaction. A good illustration of this is the scene in the movie The Last Supper, which was released earlier this month. It gives the impression that Jesus is having a temper tantrum. The approach that The Chosen uses is significantly more level. The sequence gives the impression that Jesus made a deliberate choice rather than a reaction that occurred out of the blue, since it is built up toward the moment that occurred at the conclusion of the episode before this one. The Bible does not include any information regarding the events that led up to the outburst. Yet, The Chosen's interpretation seems to be consistent with Christ's personality. Even when he is outraged, Jesus maintains control. The program does not pull any punches. A righteous wrath that is only just about contained is captured by Rumi. The sequence is unsettling to witness in its entirety. The decision to introduce a benevolent bird vendor earlier in the episode, followed by Jesus turning his fury against that vendor, is another factor that contributes to the discomfort that is displayed throughout the episode. The Chosen is mostly recounted from the views of the disciples, and the audience shares in the disciples' shock at the unexpected and out-of-character occurrence that occurs in the story. Possibly one of the most spectacular photos of the entire series is the one in which Jesus is shown standing in front of the religious leaders while brandishing a whip. In the background, tents containing vendors are burning. During the 5th season of The Chosen, the events that are taking place continue to get closer and closer to a moment of tremendous significance that takes place after Jesus and his disciples arrive in Jerusalem. This moment takes place after the events that have been unfolding previously. It would appear that the tale has a depiction of the Last Supper that is out of time and strewn throughout the narrative. This is something that looks to be the case. In the second episode of the drama, which is titled House of Cards, the city is preparing for the upcoming Passover celebrations that are about to take place. During the time that the temple is being immersed in the commotion of devotees and pilgrims who are arriving, the high priest pays a visit to King Herod Antipas in order to address the existence of a specific ministry in the city. This is done in order to solve the situation related to the presence of the ministry. At precisely the same moment that the two persons are completely engrossed in strategizing for their own self-preservation, Jesus makes his own unexpected move. The fact that his journey to the Holy Temple would take an unexpected and historic turn seemed to be something that was destined to happen. A cautionary message was sent by Jesus during the time of the Last Supper. Following the events of the future timeline in which Jesus and the apostles are having the Last Supper, the Messiah continues to educate his disciples after he has informed them of his impending death. This occurs as we are following the events of the future timeline. They are startled to learn of his passing, as was to be expected, despite the fact that they appreciate his devotion to honesty. The 12 men are shocked to learn of his passing. Jesus gives them a warning about the difficulties that they would face in the days that are to come as an answer to their question. On the other hand, he warns them that this will no longer be the case, despite the fact that their sermons have been welcomed with open arms up to this point in time, with no reservations whatsoever. As a condition for going out on missions this time, he mandates that they must equip every piece of armor in their arsenal, even swords, for the purpose of providing protection. He is very clear about the necessity of this criterion. In addition, Jesus gives them the assurance that their security will come from above, as the Father would send his protection to them. Jesus is heard saying this at the same time as the previous statement. When Jesus is asked by his disciples why he cannot simply remain with them in order to keep them under his protection, he responds by stating that they are all destined to turn away from him. At first glance, it would appear that the devil will put them to the test in the days that are to come. Nevertheless, Jesus reveals to Peter that he has prayed for his faith, and that once he himself returns, Peter will be able to assist others in restoring their faith. It is now time to make a huge sacrifice, one in which one must entirely give up their life in order to save the lives of their friends. This sacrifice must be made in order to save our lives. Despite the fact that each apostle underlines that they are ready to make this sacrifice for their leader, Jesus tells them that he is the one who is necessary to complete this role. He is the one who is responsible for fulfilling this position. Within the group of disciples, there are certain individuals who are attentive to the watcher. In the days leading up to Passover, the apostles find themselves in the process of preparing for their distinct missions of preaching. This preparation takes place in several different ways. One person in particular, Simon Peter, is brimming with excitement about the potential, despite the fact that he continues to have reservations about his talents. When everything is going on, John is traveling with his father to deliver the holy anointing oil to the Pharisees as well as the high priest. This is taking place while everything else is going on. At that area, he and another young man find themselves bemoaning the rituals and customs of the older priests that are exclusionary. These rituals and traditions frequently force younger men, like them, to remain on the outside. On the other hand, Thomas is confronted by Caiaphas, Rama's father, who continues to blame him for the death of his daughter. Caiaphas continues to hold Thomas accountable for the death of his daughter. John's pessimism is ultimately shown to be an accurate depiction of the reality when the moment comes, and he finds himself in front of a great number of people. The young guy is unable to recall the particulars of his stories, so he frequently needs to consult his brother, Andrew, who quietly fills in the blanks for him from the audience. This is because the young man is unable to recall the intricacies of his stories. In spite of this, when John's sermon is complete, the other people continue to be proud of him for the significant leap and success that he has made. Simon Z, on the other hand, continues to remain aware of his surroundings. He was the one who noticed the mysterious man in a cloak taking notes in the crowd. He raises the question of whether or not such public preaching is a sensible action, taking into consideration the possibility that spies could be able to report their behavior back to Rome. As a consequence of this, the aura of mystery that is associated with the veiled note-maker gains even more prominence. During this day, Jesus cleanses the temple that is located in Jerusalem. In spite of the fact that it is a place of worship, the Temple of Jerusalem continues to be quite enmeshed in other issues that are more worldly in nature. It is the most demonstrative example of this that the Gentiles, Leander, Fatia, and Dion, who had traveled to the city with the intention of meeting Jesus and taking part in the ceremonies of Passover, entered the city. Consequently, the followers of the Messiah train them on the holy day, informing them on the ritual of providing sacrifices in which animals are slain to cover the sins of the believers. This is done in order to cover the sins of the believers. Additionally, for whatever reason, this animal cannot be acquired with cash that displays the faces of pagan deities. This is the case regardless of the reason. Due to this, Leander is compelled to exchange his currency at a rate that is much greater than the rate that is currently available on the market. It is safe to say that almost everyone has accepted the reality that this is a truth that is inconvenient. On the other hand, when Jesus visits the temple, he is unable to deny the discontent that he feels because of what the people have done to the place of worship that his Father has constructed. He is appalled by what they have done. Rather than being full with love, faith, and belief, the plaza is crowded with customers arguing over pricing, shops who are greedy, and animals who are trapped in cages. Things finally come to a head when he finds out that a trader is attempting to take a shortcut through the temple in order to speed up the process of getting her merchandise wherever she needs to go. Because of this, he eventually lets out his wrath, along with the whip that he had been working on the night before. This is a consequence of what happened. As a consequence of this, Jesus causes the destruction of the markets by releasing animals, turning tables over, and cracking his whip in order to instill fear in the people. Within a short period of time, this issue is brought to the attention of the guards as well as the Pharisees, most especially Caiaphas, who was the high priest at the time. Additionally, earlier in the day, the latter had made a visit to King Herod in order to discuss the growing challenges that were taking place in the city. The fact that Jesus arrived in Jerusalem on a donkey and that the people continued to proclaim that he was the son of David is something that continues to be a cause of anxiety for the high priest. Furthermore, He argues that Rome will surely make them a target in the future if this continues to be the case. Herod suggests that they fix the issue by putting an end to Lazarus, whose resurrection gave Jesus an additional amount of legitimacy. Herod's proposal is that they should deal with the situation by putting an end to Lazarus. Despite this, Caiaphas is of the opinion that they ought to direct their confrontation with the individual in a personal manner. Taking all of this into consideration, it would appear that the former may have found a way to justify the public demonstration of the Messiah for himself. In the second episode of the 5th season of The Chosen, which is named Last Supper, we are given the opportunity to investigate one of the most difficult and interesting situations that can be found in the Gospels. This takes place during the meal that Jesus had with his disciples. A description of the event that describes Jesus purifying the temple in Jerusalem is provided here. You can utilize the questions that are included in this Bible study and discussion guide to investigate the second episode of Season 5 with your small group, youth ministry, or Bible study congregation. These questions can be found in the Bible study and discussion guide. The purpose of this guide is to provide you with questions that you may use to examine the episode that you are now watching. Before you watch the second episode of the 5th season of The Chosen, there are a few questions that you ought to consult with yourself first. This television series has been going for a very long time, and its name is The Chosen. This is because the vast majority of episodes are not standalone tales that can be viewed on their own. Rather, they're chapters that are a part of a larger, more comprehensive narrative that must be viewed in the order that they are presented in order to be comprehended in an effective manner. After taking all of this into consideration, I would not recommend that someone go deeply into a study of The Chosen Season 5, Episode 2, unless they have first watched the seasons and episodes that came before it. Despite the fact that they might be able to follow the essential flow of events, they will not be able to comprehend the emotional impact of these occurrences, nor will they be able to understand how they fit into the character arcs that have been developing throughout the duration of the program. Before you start viewing the current season, I would recommend that you first go back and watch the episodes that came before the current season. This is something that you should do regardless of whether or not you are watching alongside other people who have seen all 4 seasons. The disciples were present during the victorious entry of Jesus Christ into the sanctuary. What was it like for them to be there? In the event that you were able to, would you be willing to describe the experience that Jesus went through? The question is, which of the disciples is beginning to guess about what the future holds not only for themselves, but also for Jesus? It is essential to have a clear understanding of the issues that keep the remaining disciples most concerned. What does Jesus see in his vision at the conclusion of the episode? And what actions does he take as a reaction to the things that he sees in his vision? At the beginning of the 3rd season, Jesus delivered a sermon to a congregation in the Decapolis that consisted of individuals who were not Jewish. What was the final consequence of the response being received? Do you believe that the disciples were the ones who took the initiative to deliver their very first sermons at that particular location? It is feasible that you would furthermore like to bring up the following concerns if you feel that the parallel chronology that is suggestive of Memento that is presented in The Chosen Season 5, Last Supper, would lead your group to be thrown off. The frigid beginning of the first episode of the series is when the conclusion of the Last Supper is revealed. This is the conclusion of the Last Supper. Additionally, the scene that came before will be presented to us in the cold open for Episode 2, the scene that came before that will be revealed to us in Episode 3, and so on and so forth. This will continue until further episodes are shown to us. In the 8th episode, it is unavoidable that the 2 different universes will eventually come into contact with one another. In preparation for your Bible study and conversation, there are a few questions that you ought to think about before you watch the second episode of the 5th season of The Chosen. I mentioned in my introduction that the primary focus of the second episode is on Jesus purifying the temple in Jerusalem. I said this throughout my introduction. Throughout the entirety of the present episode, this is something that remains consistent. It is generally agreed that the 3 Gospels that are considered to be the Synoptic Gospels are Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John, on the other hand, provides a great deal of information that is essential to this event, but is not included in the texts of the 3 Gospels. The examination of both narratives, on the other hand, is likely to consume an excessive amount of time. Accordingly, I would suggest concentrating on the variant that is synoptic. Additionally, there was the fact that they arrived at Jerusalem. He then entered the temple and began to compel people who were selling as well as those who were purchasing to leave the premises of the temple. He did this at the same time. In addition to this, he flipped the tables belonging to people who were exchanging money and the chairs belonging to those who were selling pigeons in order to conceal them from view. Furthermore, he would not permit anyone to bring anything into the temple with them at any time. Nothing could be brought in by anyone, as he would not permit it. In addition to this, he was instructing them and asking them, "Is it not written that my house shall be considered a house of prayer for all the nations? However, you have turned it into a place where thieves congregate." And the chief priests and the scribes heard it, and they were looking for a way to destroy him, because they dreaded him, because the entire crowd was amazed by his teaching. As soon as darkness fell, they had already left the city and were on their way to another site. They had already left the neighborhood. An examination of the passage found in Mark 11 verses 15 to 19. The following is something that you might wish to bring up in light of what you've experienced. Even during the time of Jesus, the majority of people who journeyed to Jerusalem from distant places were unable to bring their own animals to sacrifice for the Passover celebration. This was the case even then. This indicates that they were barred from bringing their own animals with them. Consequently, as a result of this turn of events, they were obligated to buy animals straight from the temple. The fact that the prices at which these creatures were sold were frequently rather high, as one could have imagined, is not something that should come as a surprise. In addition, tourists would be required to swap their own currency at a considerable exchange rate, which would make the situation far more difficult to deal with. One of the reasons that this predatory behavior was permitted to continue was because the leaders of the temple were given a part of the earnings. This was one of the reasons why this activity was allowed to continue. Money changers and animal dealers were only allowed to access the temple through the outer sector, which was the only sector that allowed visitors to enter the edifice. One of the primary goals of this section was to make the temple accessible to non-Jews who were interested in praying in a way that would bring them closer to God. In order to present a defense against this perversion, Jesus made reference to two verses that were penned by the prophets and are found in the Old Testament. If you read more of the original context, you will see that the significance of what he is saying will become far more apparent to you. This is due to the fact that the setting is an essential component of the narrative. Thank you for taking the time to read. And the foreigners who join themselves to the Lord, to minister to him, to love the name of the Lord, and to be his servants, everyone who keeps the Sabbath and does not profane it, and holds fast my covenant. These I will bring to my holy mountain, and I will make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be accepted on my altar. For my house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples, in accordance with the words of Isaiah 56 verses 6 to 7 in the English Standard Version of the Scriptures of Christianity. Inquiries should be made to each individual member of your group regarding the following subjects. What are some of the most important insights that Isaiah has to share with regard to the function of the temple? According to what extent did the temple fail to fulfill the role that it was designed to do during the time of Jesus? As a result of this failure, what were the primary reasons? In the same way that non-Christians from all walks of life were able to gain a closer relationship with God via the Jerusalem temple, it is anticipated that they will be able to do the same through the church. What are some of the things that we do for our own convenience that others who do not adhere to the Christian religion see as obstacles? What are some of the things that we do? Thank you for taking the time to read. Behold, you put your faith in statements that are misleading to no avail. Is it possible for you to steal, commit murder, commit adultery, make false vows, make offerings to Baal, and go after other gods that you have not known, and then come and stand before me in this home, which is called by my name, and say that we have been delivered, for the sole aim of carrying on with all of these offensive behaviors over and over again? In light of the fact that this residence, which is frequently referred to by my name, has become a gathering place for criminals, what are your feelings on the matter? The Lord declares that this is something that I have personally witnessed during my life. At this point, as you can plainly see what I did in my place that was in Shiloh, where I made my name dwell at first, and see what I did to it as a result of the wickedness that my people Israel perpetrated. That is what I did. My desire is for you to go there. And now, because you have done all of these things, declares the Lord, and because you did not listen to me when I spoke to you repeatedly, and because you did not answer when I called you, I will do the same thing to the house that is called by my name, and in which you have faith, as I did to Shiloh, and I will do the same thing to the place that I gave to you and to your fathers. You will be banished from my sight at the same time that I will exile all of your relatives and all of Ephraim's children. I will do this simultaneously. This will be done concurrently by me. Interpretation of Jeremiah 7 verses 8 to 15, exegesis study. We would greatly appreciate it if you could explain the following to us. In chapter 25 of the book of 2 Kings, Jeremiah makes a prophecy that the city of Jerusalem and the first temple will be destroyed. This prophecy is found in the book of 2 Kings. The prophecy was realized in the year 586 BC, which was the year it was fulfilled. It is known that the Assyrians were victorious over Ephraim, which was also known as the kingdom of Israel or Samaria, and that they took Ephraim, which was also known as Samaria, into exile, 2 Kings 17. Jeremiah makes reference to the fact that the Philistines were successful in seizing the Ark of God at Shiloh, 1 Samuel 4. Additionally, Jeremiah is aware of the fact that the Assyrians took Ephraim into exile. In the ancient world, a deity was considered to have suffered a defeat if the temple of that god was taken by armed force, or if the people who worshipped that god were banished from their homeland. In both of these instances, it was believed that the god had suffered a defeat. The time has arrived to provide your group the opportunity to ask the questions that are listed below. It would imply that the people to whom Jeremiah is speaking have trust that one day they would be delivered from the problems that they are currently suffering. Jeremiah has a tendency to presumptively believe that their religion is misguided. What is the reasoning for this belief? It was in the 4th chapter of 1 Samuel that the Israelites had the belief that they would be delivered from the hands of the Philistines. Do they felt that God would not want his ark to be destroyed by the Philistines? They believed that this was due of this belief. Additionally, the kingdom of Israel believed that it would be saved from the Assyrians because God would not want his people to be forced into exile. This was another belief that the kingdom of Israel held. A belief that was comparable to the one discussed earlier was this one. There's a lack of clarity on the reason that Jeremiah draws these incidents to the notice of his audience. What could be the probable explanation for this? The religious leaders of the time of Jesus had manufactured a sense of spiritual contentment and a deceptive sense of tranquility for their followers. This was due to the fact that they were the people of God and that they presided over the temple of God. The reason for this was because they were in charge of the temple of God during the time when this occurred. Jeremiah's warning is brought up by Jesus. What is the reason for this? For what reason did Jesus choose to act in this manner? To what extent do the things that people have trust in this day and age cause them to become spiritually complacent or give them a false sense of serenity with regard to their spirituality? What are some examples of these things? In the event that a person asserts that they have trust in God, at what point is it ethical to query whether or not that person is genuinely saved in accordance with the norms of ethics? In circumstances in which individuals are allowed to cultivate a sense of spiritual complacency and to take pleasure in a fictional sense of tranquility, what are the potential risks that are involved? Are there ways to warn believers who are living in a state of complacency in a way that makes them appear compassionate rather than haughty or judgmental? If so, what are those ways? Following the viewing of the 2nd episode of the 5th season of The Chosen, individuals will be given with the following questions for the purpose of engaging in conversation and studying the Bible. After I have finished watching an episode of The Chosen, I will often ask a few important questions to individuals. These questions can be stated as follows. Which are the components of the episode that stood out to you the most out of the numerous that were presented? Regarding which of the following did you feel the most profound connection? In the event that you have any inquiries or are concerned, do let me know. Were there any aspects that were not made evident to you? Regarding the chance that the conversation will acquire a life of its own, I strongly recommend that you do not feel bound by the questions that are going to be asked in the next paragraphs. This is because the debate may take on a life of its own. Instead, I would advise you to go for it and make the most of the opportunity. In the event that you believe that you require additional structure, you might want to think about asking yourself some questions, including the following. A scene from the film The Last Supper is being shown to the audience as the program begins. They are encouraged to watch it. Are there any connections that can be made between this particular scene and the remainder of the show that we are currently watching? In the moments that immediately after the closing credits, we take a quick glance back at the series of events that occurred before Thomas and Rama's voyage to Cana for the wedding. Both of these incidents took place before the wedding. In relation to Caiaphas, Naomi, and Thomas, have we come across any fresh pieces of information that we have acquired? How will this affect the way you think about how we will come into contact with them in the future and how they will interact with one another? What kind of repercussions will this have? In the event that individuals who do not adhere to the Jewish faith make an effort to worship God at the temple, what are some of the difficulties that they encounter? The people who live in the Decapolis are comprised of these individuals. Andrew contends that Jesus did not come to abolish the law, but rather to fulfill it. Matthew 5 verses 17 to 20. This is in response to the issue that is posed by one of the individuals who is not Jewish. The question is whether or not the entire temple system is in agreement with the teachings of Jesus. How would you respond to your question? Who do you believe is correct? What is the reason that we no longer participate in sacrifices and other rituals that are based on the Jewish law if Jesus did not come to abolish the Jewish law via his arrival? What are the reasons for this decision? The character of Caiaphas, the high priest, is depicted as a kind individual within the framework of episode 2. Can you explain the various ways in which this view can be interpreted? What are some of the additional ways that the episode sheds information on the evil intents that he was acting upon? We come across a large number of merchants and money changers throughout the course of episode 2. All of them have personalities and motivations that are empathetic toward their consumers. Keeping in mind that people frequently engage in inappropriate behavior with the purpose of gaining sympathy is a crucial element to take into account. Is there any significance to this at all? Do you think it's possible that this will prevent them from being found guilty of something? It has been formally acknowledged that Holy Week has entered its first week. Having successfully made his way into Jerusalem, Caiaphas is currently on the offensive in response to the assassination of Rama, and the watcher is still. During the course of his observation, Peter communicates his wish to begin preaching. Without exception, each and every one of these instances has occurred at precisely the same moment. Nevertheless, the first episode came to a depressing conclusion. After Jesus had made numerous references to his own death, we are aware of what is going to happen, but the apostles are not. He shed tears over Jerusalem, so making a prophetic prediction that the city would be destroyed. This was the point at which the first episode reached its climax. For the days will come upon you when your adversaries will set up a barricade around you and surround you and hem you in on all sides, he stated in an interview with reporters. Because of this, you will be hemmed in on all sides. By the time the episode is over, he has fashioned a rope, and by the time the second episode of The Chosen rolls around, he has finally cleaned the temple. One of the questions that Jesus poses to his ministers is, would you be willing to put up your life for me? Due to the fact that I only have a few more things to say, I would like to request that you pay a great deal of attention to what I have to say. Would you be willing to give up? Do you recall when I separated you into pairs and sent you out the door? You are not permitted to bring any money bags, knapsacks, or footwear with you, as I have directed you to do. Did you find that you were lacking in any particular things? Absolutely none of it. On the other side, things were much easier back then because you were serving your own people and they did want you there and they accepted your message. This made things a lot simpler. The expansion of our ministry was taking place in spite of the fact that there was so little opposition. From this point forward, things are going to be treated differently. The world that you are about to inhabit is going to be a very unpleasant one. Because you are not of the world, the country has rejected me, and they will continue to reject you too because of this, because I picked you out of all the people in the world. You were the one I went with since you are not like other people. Everyone now looks down on you with contempt. If you have a money bag, I recommend that you bring it with you. In the same vein, a knapsack is the same. It is also recommended that you sell your cloak and buy a sword if you do not already have one in your possession. At that precise instant, Simon seizes the 2 swords that they have, but he emphasizes that they will not be adequate to defend the 12 men because they are themselves. He warns that they will not be sufficient. Immediately after, John makes a correction by saying 11. This is a reference to Judas' departure, which we have not yet seen. The next thing that Jesus says is, "My point is that you should be prepared for hostility and prosecution." The speaker then continues to clarify that at the end of the day, your protection will ultimately come from on high. Nathaniel is unable to comprehend the events they're taking on around him. Jesus never ceases reminding them that he is about to leave them and that he will provide them with a servant. He says this frequently for a variety of reasons. "Why don't you stay, Rabbi?" "It is merely that I am intrigued," he asks. During the time when Jesus is making his prediction, "You will all fall away because of me tonight," he is making a reference to the prophecy that Zechariah made about the sheep being scattered. "I will go before you to Galilee after I am raised up," he says with confidence. "I will raise myself up." Peter gives Jesus his word that he will never abandon him to his own devices. "You, Simon, for the purpose of sifting you like wheat, Satan endeavored to acquire each and every one of you. It was his desire to have all of you. However, I have prayed specifically for you that your faith may not fail. And when you have returned, I will strengthen your brothers," Jesus proceeds to say. During this time, Peter confesses to Jesus that he will also be dying beside him. "I'm giving you all of these warnings about what is going to happen tonight and moving forward so that when it all happens, you will know that it was a part of God's plan and that I am who I claim I am." Jesus adds, "I am telling you, even you." It is in connection to their relationship that he says, "The rooster will not crow this day until you deny 3 times that you even know me." This is a statement that Jesus makes, with the argument that there is no one who possesses greater love than this, that someone would lay down his life for his friends. Jesus makes the statement. The apostles are angered and devastated by the entire concept of this happening. This is despite the fact that they all claim to be loyal to Jesus. Peter makes the following statement, "Then that is what we will have to do." And Jesus quickly responds by saying, "That is what I will have to do." Peter's speech is immediately followed by Jesus' response. The second episode begins with a quick flashback to the time when Rama was still alive, just before she is about to leave for a wedding with Thomas. This occurs after the opening titles have stopped playing. Kaphne receives a present of beads from her mother, and Thomas expresses to her how he has been an excellent example to strive to be like. Although Kaphne is aware that Thomas is obsessive, he requests, "Please do not embarrass either me or the vineyard." This is in spite of the fact that Kaphne is aware of Thomas's behavior toward the vineyard. Naomi shares with Thomas that Kaphne has faith in him, and Thomas expresses his gratitude to them for making him a member of the family. Thomas tells Naomi, "I've always been able to spot potential," and she agrees with him. Naomi also shares with Thomas that she supports him and believes in him. Peter makes an attempt to preach in Jerusalem, but he essentially misinterprets the parable that Jesus told. The correct version may be found in Matthew 18 verses 21 to 35. At the same time, Simon notices the watcher lurking close, taking further notes. Who is this watcher, and what is the reason that he is so interested in Jesus and the apostles? Peter experiences feelings of embarrassment after the event, but Andrew assures him that he is still proud of him. Simon inquires as to whether or not anyone has seen the man taking notes, and while Andrew and Philip do not appear to be frightened or threatened, Simon is obviously of the opinion that there is a reason to be concerned. The watcher hastily departs, and Andrew, together with Dion and Fatia, comes upon a Greek guy named Leander. Leander was a character from the 3rd season. From the Decapolis, they have made their way to Jerusalem in order to attend Passover and see Jesus. Is it okay if I ask a childish question? Therefore, what exactly is the holiday that is commonly referred to as Passover? That is the question that Fatia poses. Philip offers a succinct summary of the significance of Passover by noting, Passover is the celebration of the story of Exodus, where God freed the Israelites from bondage. This statement allows Philip to present a simple summary of the significance of Passover. After receiving the information from Andrew that they are required to present the temple with a sacrifice of an animal, they went to the market in order to purchase one. There is only one issue. The Greeks are obligated to pay with money from the local area since they do not have any other currency than their own, and they do not have any other currency. As Philip cautions, the interest rate is predatory, and the conversion rate is expensive. In addition, the interest rate is relatively high. The rates that are being offered are both very outrageous. In the event that Leander makes an effort to purchase a goat, he is subjected to an excessive quantity of charges, and he is required to pay taxes that are at least 40% of the value of the animal. This is not something that I do for free, he explains, and he is in accord with what he is communicating. It is possible that the wood that is used to fuel the fires that are used to incinerate the victims simply falls from the sky. Is this a possibility? As a result, this would imply that more than 1 million animals have been killed due to the fact that there are more than 1 million people present in this region. Is it correct that the labor force that is required to manage everything is provided at no cost to the organization? According to him, in order for each adult male to be able to make a contribution to the finance of this presentation, it is required for them to pay a tax to the temple. Despite Philip's efforts to convince Leander to behave with a little bit more reverence on sacred grounds, Leander ultimately falls into Philip's demands and fulfills his obligation. In spite of the fact that Philip encourages him to be more reverent, this appears to be the case. Additionally, in a distinct phase of the novel, Tamar stumbles into a bird dealer from Libya. Due to the fact that he is so captivated by the beauty of Tamar's emeralds, he makes a generous offer to them, offering to give them 2 doves at free cost with no strings attached. The following is what he replied to her. No matter how far a stream flows, it never forgets where it came from. After that, Tamar and Fatia formed themselves into a line in order to hand over their doves to the priest. In the course of their interaction, John and Malchus have a confrontation that is loaded with tension. In order to acquire olive oil, Malchus, who is the most important servant of the high priest, makes arrangements for John and Zebedee to meet with him. He asks both of them whether they are ritually clean as they are about to approach the beautiful gate, and he cautions them that there's a higher level of ceremonial purity than they could ever expect to achieve. He does this as they are about to approach the gate. This is something that needs to be addressed before entering the room in order to have your oils examined by the board. He notes that the master of oils requires a verbal confirmation of purity that goes beyond simple mikvah immersion. This is something that must be addressed before entering the chamber. Rabbi Zebediah makes his appearance and asks them to truly swear on the pain of death that they have not touched a dead body, a mole, a mouse, a lizard, a woman who is menstruating, or a seminal discharge, that they have not consumed unclean foods, and that they have not been diagnosed with leprosy. He also asks them to swear that they have not consumed any unclean foods. Malchus makes a joke about staying with John outside while they are having their chat, and John agrees to stay with him regardless of the joke. Malchus offers to give John the impression that he is dirty almost immediately after John expresses his concern that he is dirty. Malchus is heard saying, "These elderly men are punishing us for having bodies of our own." At this point, John responds, "I guess the law is the law." As far as Malchus is concerned, the high priest has been in charge of a system that categorizes individuals according to their position in the hierarchy, and he takes great pleasure in excluding individuals. Caiaphas possesses more than one rabbi, and his irritation permeates the entire household. Malchus adds, making a reference to the high priest's hatred for Jesus, who is putting himself in such a precarious position. He may even be prosecuted for multiple offenses, despite the fact that the people want to crown him king for the first time. Malchus is referring to the fact that Caiaphas had more than one rabbi. However, before they get the opportunity to continue their talk, Zebedee leaves and Malchus rushes them to Caiaphas' office as soon as he can. When it comes to Jesus, Caiaphas is going through a great deal of anguish. According to him, Rome may be inflamed by the hysteria that the people have for Jesus, as well as their desire for him to become king. This is something that should be taken into consideration. According to him, Rome has the potential to serve as a catalyst in the situation. Pilate, according to Herod, has a plan. He should kill Lazarus, which would weaken the legitimacy of his supporters. Herod wants Pilate to kill Lazarus. Taking into account the fact that Jesus is unquestionably in possession of the ability to bring Lazarus back to life once more, this method should be considered intrinsically foolish. Furthermore, contrary to what Caiaphas claims, Rome is the only nation that holds the authority to carry out the death penalty. But Herod feels that Rome might be cunning, particularly when taking into consideration the fact that Jesus and his apostles have already resisted stoning. Caiaphas makes the assertion, "I have received a prophecy from God," as the conversation proceeds, while Herod continues to keep his mocking tone throughout the entire exchange. According to the prophecy, there will be one person who will give his life for the sake of the people in order to prevent the catastrophic destruction of our nation. This individual will be the one who will make the sacrifice. Caiaphas receives a warning from Herod in the next phrase, which suggests that the evidence against Jesus is insufficient due to the conditions that are currently taking place. From what I've heard, he's only preached peace, forgiveness, and love, along with a bunch of other boring stuff. He adds more clarification. According to him, they only care if he poses a threat to them. He stated to the media, "Between you and me, I thought he might be the baptizer reappearing from the dead to exact revenge on me. But now he just seems amusing." On the other hand, there's a problem. Despite the fact that the people may believe that Jesus is the son of David, he has never made it abundantly obvious that he is the king. Caiaphas does not understand Herod's seeming lack of concern for all of this, which is something that Herod appears to have over all of this stuff. In spite of the fact that Herod is the one who is responsible for mediating the power dynamic that exists between the temple and Rome, it is probable that he was the one who issued the order to execute John the Baptist. In addition to that, he is awarded extraordinary rights. This is what he says in the event that you are successful. "I will be the one who is left to pick up the pieces." When compared to the execution of Jesus, the death of Lazarus did not cause nearly as much trouble for the people as it did for the people. In spite of the fact that this is the situation, the high priest is a firm believer in the prophesy, which is about the sacrifice of a single individual in order to ensure that the nation would continue to exist. According to the speaker, Jesus is tearing the people apart, the speaker asserted about the situation. In order to prevent further alienation of his subjects, Caiaphas provides the following explanation. "Now, unless you want to further alienate your subjects, tell them to wait for Jesus to mispronounce and incite the ire of Rome, and then they can take care of him before they feel the need to take care of us." Caiaphas's goal is to prevent further alienation of his subjects. After that, he continues by saying, "There's one thing that people hate more than they love Jesus." But before he can go any more on what that item is, the scene shifts to Thomas and Caiaphas in the marketplaces of the city. This happens before he is able to provide any further explanation regarding what those things are. Caiaphas tells Thomas that he will soon be seated with Jesus for the final meal of his life, despite the fact that the situation is just as tight as you might anticipate it to be. Thomas is astonished by this news. It is only Naomi that he is able to see, despite the fact that he becomes aware of Rama when he is in the thick of the crowd. The fact that she is more compassionate than her husband does not change the reality that she is not pleased to see Thomas. This individual does not make her happy. She is crying, but she cries out, "She was supposed to bury me, not the other way around." Despite the fact that she is crying, she tells the truth. During the chat that he had with Naomi, Thomas reveals that she had a devotion to Jesus and that he was not the one who was responsible for her passing away. The assumption that he made, which is that she believed everything he did, is completely accurate. At precisely the same time that the plates of the market stalls are trembling with the sound of coins and the aroma of animals is permeating the air, Jesus enters the market to denounce the merchants. During this moment, he is doing this as well. It is during the course of the talk that he tells one of the women, "This is not a shortcut. This is a place to worship the Father," and he does not permit her to enter through the door. At this juncture, he issues the command, "Now is the time to turn around and go back," which will be carried out. Due to the fact that he has been working with the same currency broker since the beginning of the show, he is currently interacting with the same individual. When I was growing up, this location was always filled with the sounds of people praying and worshiping my Father. It is now impossible for me to hear worship because of the sounds of animals and all of you bickering over costs, which sound quite similar to one another, he adds in response to the question. As soon as Jesus reaches this point, he takes his whip out of his backpack and begins to flip tables, so causing chaos throughout the entirety of the temple. Every single person is to leave his Father's house as soon as possible and put an end to the profanity that is being directed toward it. Furthermore, he instructs the animals to exit their enclosures and cages, which enables him to liberate them from their confinement. Following a short period of time, a couple of the booths are consumed by fire, and the disciples are unable to prevent him from doing so. As he yells out to the audience, he says, "Take a look at what you've done to my Father's house. You look like a den of thieves." Because to the passage of time, it has been brought to the attention of everyone, including all of his apostles, Pilate, and Caiaphas, who is observing from the steps of the temple. Describe the steps that you have taken to take action. It is during the time that Judas is murmuring that the episode reaches its climax and concludes there. As a means of getting things rolling, you should inform your young folks that you're going to read 2 different books and then compare them to one another. This will get things moving in the right direction. Now is the time to provide your pupils with the following passages to read as part of their assigned reading assignments. God is the one who is accountable for the creation of the heavens and the earth, and this responsibility dates back to the beginning of time. Both the surface of the sea and the land were utterly devoid of any form or substance, and the earth itself was completely dark. There was not a single ray of light. Not only that, but the Holy Spirit was hovering above the surface of the waves, which was an additional insult to the wounds that were already present. Immediately after that, God uttered the words, "Let there be light," and light manifested right in front of his very eyes. In this particular instance, God was able to determine that the light in question was beneficial. In addition, God determined that there is a difference between the light and the darkness that exists on the spectrum. Day was the name that God gave to the light, and night was the name that he employed to describe the darkness. Both day and night were referred to by God in his creation. In the first day, there was a dawn, and there was also an evening. Both of these took place. It was at the same moment that both of these events took place. This is an interpretation of Genesis 1 verses 1 to 5 according to the English Standard Version. It was the Word that existed in the beginning, and the Word was present with God. Furthermore, the Word was both God and the Word that existed at the same time. During the time that God was initially creating the world, he was present in the situation. Without him, there would have been nothing that could have been made, and everything that was made through him. He was the driving force behind all that was made. Every single thing that was produced was a direct result of his efforts. He was someone who was full of life, and he was the origin of the light that mankind were looking for throughout their lives. In spite of the fact that it is located in the heart of the darkness, the light shines, and the darkness has not been able to triumph over it. These passages are included in the English Standard Version of 1 John 1 verses 1 to 5. I would like to use this opportunity to bring the following to your attention once again. In point of fact, the first passage is derived from the book of Genesis, which was written by Moses. Both of these books were written by Moses. The very first verses of the Bible can be located right here in this particular spot. The Gospel of John, which was written by one of Jesus' disciples more than 1,000 years after the death of Jesus, is the source of the second passage that is being reviewed here. This text was written by John. After that, you need to make sure that your students are aware of the following. There are a number of situations in which the first chapters of the books of Genesis and John share similarities. What are some of these cases? They should talk to one another about a few words and phrases that they share in common with one another and identify those words and phrases. What is the subject matter that they're both going to discuss during the entirety of this meeting? There are a number of distinctions between the first chapter of John and the first chapter of Genesis. What are some of these discrepancies? What are some of the ways in which the book of Genesis is different from the book of John in terms of the information that it contains? Does the book of John offer anything to the tale that was not previously known? The book of Genesis does not supply any fresh information regarding the subject matter. It was John who was the one who copied Genesis and not the other way around. This is due to the fact that the Gospel of John was written at a later time compared to the other Gospel letters. In response to the subject of why John chose to start his Gospel with the first chapter of Genesis, what are your thoughts on the matter? Furthermore, what is the impetus behind the modifications that he makes, and why does he make them? Regarding the chance that he is attempting to convey anything to you, what are your observations and thoughts? You ought to make sure that your young people are aware of the following. When compared to the beginnings of past episodes of The Chosen, this one is going to start in a manner that is a little bit different from what has been seen in this particular episode. Previous episodes of The Chosen opened with a flashback to an incident from the Old Testament or from an earlier time in the life of a prominent character. This often occurred at the beginning of the episode. The reason for this was to prepare the audience for the next episode that will be coming up. The opening sequence of this episode of The Chosen takes place much later in the lives of the key protagonists. That is, when Jesus rose from the dead and sent his followers out to proclaim the gospel and create the church. This episode begins with a flash forward. In the future, the events of the episode happen. In this particular episode, the episode is referred to as The Chosen. During the very first scene of The Chosen, the main character, John, who is the son of Zebedee, one of the early disciples of Jesus, starts writing the Gospel of John. Zebedee was one of the disciples who followed Jesus. As John begins to explain the thoughts and experiences that he is experiencing, the scene follows him as he does so. At first look, it would appear that all of the disciples had gathered together to express their sorrow over the passing of James, John's brother, who had been executed not too long ago owing to his religious beliefs. James had been executed because of his religious beliefs. Following the conclusion of this opening sequence, which takes place in the future, The Chosen travels back in time to the point in time where it left off, which was at the moment when the first season came to an end. In the event that the majority of students have already watched the first season of The Chosen, then I would not recommend that we watch the first episode of the second season of The Chosen together. Keep in mind that this is an extremely important topic. In the event that you and your youth group have not yet watched the first season of The Chosen, I have created a guide that is equivalent to this one for each episode. So make sure that you check it out. Make sure that you watch it. Even though all of your young people have seen the entire season, and especially if some of them haven't watched the full series, I would still propose that you take a moment to recap the tale up to this point. I suggest that you do this because it is important to keep your audience engaged. Due to the fact that the story has been recounted up to this point, this is the result. The reason for this is that the first episode of Season 2 is quite complex, and it is expected that you are aware of everything that has occurred up to this point in the production. This is the reason why this is the case. Taking this into consideration, you should let your young people know that you're going to be reviewing the first season of The Chosen. Although it is not required of you to provide answers to all of these questions, you should let them know that you will be doing so. I am curious as to how many of you are familiar with the narrative of Mary Magdalene, who is also known as Lilith in certain schools of thought. At the time that The Chosen first started telling its story, what did her life look like at that point in time? What was the exact moment when her life started to change? It piqued my interest to see how she would react to it. To what extent does anyone who is still living have the ability to recollect the version of events that Matthew described? When he was employed, who was he working for? There is a lack of clarity regarding the manner in which he was treated by the other Jewish individual. To what extent was he able to converse with Jesus? And what were the events that led to this? What kinds of reactions did the other disciples have to the communication that Jesus carried out on the day that Matthew received the call? In relation to the narrative of Simon, who is occasionally referred to as Peter, and his brother, Andrew, what are your thoughts on the matter? To be more specific, what was the issue that Simon was attempting to resolve in terms of his efforts? Regarding the method in which he sought to fix things on his own, Are you aware of it? What exactly was the solution to the issue that we were facing at the time? In light of this, the question that naturally arises is, what exactly transpired with Simon and Andrew? It is possible that you may recall that Simon and Andrew were individuals who were acquainted with a guy named Zebedee and his two sons, James and John. It is possible that you will recall this particular thing. In the first season of The Chosen, James and John did not function as the show's principal characters. However, in the second season, they will play a role that is significantly more significant than the one they played in the first season. Something that you remembering is the link that exists between the brothers James and John, as well as the bond that exists between the brothers Andrew and Simon. Both of these connections are important to you. Jesus came into contact with a number of individuals while he was there at the wedding. Two of these individuals were a guy named Thomas and a woman named Rama. It was around this time that he was in the process of changing water into wine that an occurrence of this nature happened. Do you have any recollection of who they were and what transpired with whom they were involved? Do you think it's possible that you could remember? On the way to the well, Jesus had a chat with a Samaritan woman. This interaction took place around the same time that the first season of The Chosen was drawing to a close. It is important to remember the activities that took place on that particular day. Remember to let your pupils know that as the prologue takes a flashback to the future, The Chosen will pick up with all of these folks once more. This is an extremely important piece of information to convey to them. When you want to start a conversation with your young people, you should ask them the following questions. In the course of the episode, did you come across anything that left you feeling perplexed or overwhelmed with a sense of confusion? It appeared as though a great deal of activity was taking place. It is important to make an effort to throw light on the specifics that they were unable to develop a connection with. Is there something that particularly drew your attention to it? Have there ever been any experiences that have left an indelible mark on you that will remain with you for the rest of your life? It is time to redirect the attention of your younger generation back to the narrative of the frame, which is the scene that flashes forward from the prologue. This is the place where you should focus your attention. Find out from the pupils in your class. You have witnessed the steps that John took in order to compose his gospel. This is something that you have noticed. Do you have any observations? Is it possible that the only explanation is that God zapped John, took control of him, and documented everything that took place? In the beginning of the introduction, we observed John doing something all by himself. What was it that he was undertaking? The time period during which Jesus was still physically present on earth is the focal point of a sizable section of the story's narrative. In the first chapter of Genesis, John's experiences with Jesus led to the realization that Jesus was both a human being and the God who created everything. This realization came to as a result of the several interactions that John had with Jesus. Could you tell me about some of these encounters? What do you think it would have been like to have that revelation to the maximum extent possible if you had known that your buddy and leader was also God in some sense? Are you able to imagine what it would have been like? It is important to bring the following situation to the attention of the younger generation. According to the Gospel of Mark, John and his brother James are referred to as the sons of thunder, Mark 3 verse 17. This is stated in the context of the Gospel of Mark. This is the name that is typically used to refer to the two different individuals or groups of people. In the whole book of John, the author of the Gospel of John, there is not a single time in which John uses his own name in any way, shape, or form. Within the context of the Bible, he makes reference to himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved, John 13, verse 23, which is a specific verse. Find out from the pupils in your class. What do you think John meant when he referred to himself in his Gospel as the disciple whom Jesus loved? Was it because he was a more exceptional person in compared to all of the other participants in the discipleship? According to your interpretation, what do you think John meant when he made this statement, taking into account the episode? What is the extent to which you believe that you are followers of Jesus, whom he loves without any conditions? In the event that there are any, what are the causes? In the event that we sincerely believe that we are disciples who are loved by the God who created the entire universe, what kind of behavior should we exhibit in our daily lives? What kind of implications does this concept have for the way that we spend our lives? The first episode of the second season of The Chosen is contained in this episode, as well as the scripture frequently asked questions that are presented in this episode. People often refer to James and John as the sons of thunder. But who exactly are these individuals who are referred to as the sons of thunder? Are you familiar with the origin of the phrase sons of thunder? It is reported in the Bible that Jesus referred to James and John, who were the sons of Zebedee, as the sons of thunder or Boanerges. Mark 3 verse 17. James and John were members of the Zebedee family. The name that Jesus had given them was the one that he used to refer to them. In spite of this, numerous commentators have arrived at the conclusion that it is due to the hurried and frenzied attitude that is displayed when they ask for fire to be rained down on Samaritans for their rejection of Jesus. Luke 9 verses 51 to 56. Numerous interpreters have arrived at this conclusion, despite the fact that the reason why Jesus refers to James and John as the sons of thunder is never made explicit to us. The Chosen, which also offers an example of how the fervor of James and John could be directed toward the advancement of a cause that is worthy of their support, reflects this worldview and presents a mirror image of it. James and John were reprimanded by Jesus. What was the reason for his intervention in their situation? When James and John urged Jesus to call fire down on the Samaritans who rejected him, Jesus responds by rebuking them in the Bible. These verses can be found in Luke 9 verses 51 to 56. These are the requests that James and John would want to have granted to Jesus. We do not have access to the exact words that Jesus spoke, which is a great disappointment. Rather than adopting the mindset that Jesus recommended, which is to love one's enemies and pray for those who reject and persecute another person, it seems that James and John are being punished for being excessively combative and violent. This is in contrast to the advice that Jesus gave. When compared to the approach that Jesus preached, this is in stark contrast. By making the assumption that James and John plowed a field, you are absolutely correct. The Bible does not contain any evidence to support the idea that Jesus asked James and John to work in the cultivation of a field. This assertion is not supported by any evidence. In the first episode of the second season of The Chosen, Jesus gives Big James and John the task of tilling a field. It is also his request that they do so. One of the most important things is that we do not know the explanation behind this. Through the course of the episode, we come to understand that Jesus is ordering them to carry out this obligation in order to provide support to a character who is having troubles. The Chosen is the one who initially conceived of this scenario and came up with the idea for it. Someone else played the part of Big James in the movie The Chosen, which was released in the years. Within the context of the television drama The Chosen, the role of Big James has been recast not once, but twice. When it happened for the first time, it was in the middle of the first season, and when it happened again, it was in the middle of the second season. In order to fill the part of John, The Chosen is looking for a suitable candidate. In the film The Chosen, which actor performed the role of Big James, the main character and protagonist? In the film The Chosen, George Harrison Xanthus is heard supplying his voice for the character of John, who is Zebedee's son. John represents Zebedee's son. Over the course of the first half of the first season of the show, Cheyenne Sobian plays the role of Big James. In the second part of the first season of the production, Kian Kavusi takes over the role of Big James. This occurs during the play's first season. It has been decided that Abe Martell would continue to portray the role throughout the entirety of the second season and beyond. When it comes to the television show The Chosen, who exactly is Kaphne? Throughout the course of the novel The Chosen, the protagonist, Rama, is a female disciple of Jesus. In addition to being Rama's father, she is Kaphne's daughter. His name is Kaphne. Although there is a character in the Bible named Kaphne, there is no connection between this name and that character. There is no such thing as this name. It was decided to develop a fictional persona in order to demonstrate how challenging it would be for a parent to allow his daughter to follow Jesus. Who exactly is Melech? As depicted in the film The Chosen, one would wonder. Melech, a Samaritan man who has been engaged in an accident, has a first-hand meeting with Jesus in the first episode of the second season of The Chosen. A direct encounter occurs between Melech and Jesus. Before he was hurt, He had conducted a robbery and then abandoned the victim, leaving him for dead. This occurred before he was taken into custody. Something like this took place before he became injured. There is a strong suggestion that the person who he robbed is the major figure in the parable of the Good Samaritan, which may be found in Luke 10:25-37. This statement is supported by the circumstances. According to the Bible, the identity of the robbers who are described in the story are not revealed to us at any point during the course of the description of the story. To add insult to injury, there is no evidence to suggest that the story is based on actual events that have taken place in the world. It is possible for you to take a straightforward approach to the Bible and propose that the following passage be taken into account by the young people in your care. Following a great deal of consideration, Jesus made the decision to set off on his journey to Galilee the year after tomorrow. He came across Philip and told him, "Follow me." At that time, Philip was a citizen of Bethsaida, which was the city where Andrew and Peter were born. He gave Philip the command to follow him. Instructing Philip to follow him, he said, when Philip found Nathaniel, he told him, "We have found him of whom Moses wrote in the law and also the prophets, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." Nathaniel responded by asking Philip, "Is it possible for anything positive to emerge from Nazareth?" Jesus saw Nathanael approaching him and remarked, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit." Philip told him, "Come and see." Jesus noticed Nathanael going toward him because he was coming toward him. On the other hand, Nathanael answered to Jesus by exclaiming, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God." Nathanael asked him, "How is it that you are familiar with me?" Jesus responded by saying, "Before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you. You are the supreme leader of Israel." Jesus responded to him by asking, "Do you believe what I said to you? I saw you under the fig tree." As he spoke to him, he added, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." John 1 verses 43-51 ESV. He further remarked, "You will see greater things than these." In the immediate aftermath of the conclusion of the reading, you ought to ask the following questions to the young people in your care. Which aspects of the story stood out to you the most, and why did you find that to be the case? When Jesus said, "I saw you under the fig tree," he was referring to which of the following, according to your understanding of the phrase? As an additional question, what do you think the reason was that Nathanael was so moved by that he made the decision to believe in Jesus? It is recommended that you engage in a discussion with your pupils regarding this inquiry after you have provided them with sufficient time and space to contemplate it. Individuals who read the Bible, as well as those who interpret it, have been experiencing a great deal of perplexity for a considerable amount of time due to this question. Fig trees were associated with times in Israel's history when the nation flourished under the sovereignty of a good ruler, according to the readings of the Bible that were offered by a few different individuals. It is possible to find examples like this throughout the book of Exodus. In the Bible, it is written that Judah and Israel lived in safety, from Dan even to Beersheba, every man under his vine and under his fig tree, all the days of Solomon. 1 Kings 4 verse 25 ESV. This particular passage is found in the book of Kings. This passage of Scripture provides a description of the circumstances that prevailed throughout the reign of Solomon. This section includes a description of the time period during which King Solomon was at the zenith of his political authority. In light of this, it is highly plausible that Jesus makes a reference to the fig tree in order to communicate a hint about how, as a result of the fact that he is the Messiah who has been chosen, he would bring flourishing to the kingdom of God. In spite of the fact that it is most likely that this is only one of the many levels that are happening place, it is difficult to comprehend why Nathanael would have been so fascinated by it from the beginning. Suddenly, he goes from being unimpressed to proudly declaring his belief in Jesus. This is because the idea that Jesus being from the slums of Nazareth causes him to be moved. As a result of the fact that Jesus is from Nazareth, this outcome has occurred. The Gospel of John has a number of other passages that demonstrate how Jesus is able to know the thoughts and feelings of other people, particularly their problems with sin. These verses are found in the Gospel of John. There is a story in the Gospel of John that contains this particular story. In the case of the Samaritan woman, for instance, when Jesus encounters her at the well, he is fully aware of all of her previous experiences with inappropriate interactions with men. Additionally, he is aware of all of the previous encounters that she has had with other guys. As a result of this, it is probable that this is yet another incident of Jesus peering into the soul of another human. This is the case despite the fact that John does not provide us with a clear definition of what Jesus is referring to when he tells Nathaniel that he saw him under the fig tree. During the episode of The Chosen that we're going to see today, we will be shown one of the potential possibilities that could explain what was going on with Nathaniel. This scenario will be shown to us during the program. This is essentially what the creators of The Chosen imagined Nathaniel's history to be like, taking into consideration the fact that they do not have any more information about Nathaniel than what we have just written about him. It is a fairly interesting story, and it is completely compatible with what we would predict Jesus to do. Despite this, it is a pretty interesting story. The review questions that will be taken into consideration have been selected at this time. In spite of the fact that there is not a regular previously on The Chosen segment, I believe that it would be a good idea to revisit some of the most important content from past episodes of The Chosen on a regular basis. This is especially true when one takes into mind the fact that there is no segment of this kind. This is as a result of the fact that the plot of The Chosen has become more intricate during the course of the second season of the show. This is simply a brief review, so it is not necessary to spend an excessive amount of time on it. Nevertheless, there are a few questions that you might want to read over again at this point before moving on to the next one. Considering the fact that you do not have any other knowledge, to what extent would you characterize and describe Matthew's personality? If you were to tell me about his life up to this very minute, what would you want to tell me? What were the circumstances that led to Simon and Matthew's initial encounter with one another? The solution to this query is something that has to be provided. Within the context of Matthew, what type of impression did Simon have of Matthew? For what purpose? Have you arrived at the realization that he has not yet moved on from the affair that led to his divorce? Who exactly was John the Baptist? And are you familiar with his identity? Do you recall what transpired with him during the first season of the first season? Do you recall the events that took place during that season? Would you be able to offer me with information about the relationship that existed between John the Baptist and Andrew? Your response would be greatly appreciated. The episode of The Chosen that I am currently viewing is one of the episodes from the second season. The second and third episodes of the second season of The Chosen are currently available to stream on YouTube for anyone who is interested in seeing them. In addition, I would like to strongly recommend that you download the Chosen app, which is available on both Google and Apple platforms. Considering that the Chosen will be moving entirely to the application in the not-too-distant future, I would like to strongly recommend that you consider purchasing it. In spite of the fact that I make every effort to avoid engaging in an excessive amount of teaching while I am viewing The Chosen, I do occasionally respond to remarks made by other viewers using the chat feature. For any trouble that this may create, please accept my apologies. I hope that young people would not only regard The Chosen to be a detailed example of preaching, but that they will also consider it to be something that they will like. This is my goal. The most of the time, I simply describe who the people are, and then every once in a while, I provide a brief explanation of a reference or allusion that was unclear to my younger self while I was writing it. In other words, I am describing the characters. I Saw You is the topic of discussion in the second episode of the second season of The Chosen. The episode is titled, I Saw You. When you want to start a conversation with your young people, you should ask them the following questions. Which are the components of the episode that stood out to you the most, out of the numerous that were presented? It would be really appreciated if you could provide me with some queries that you might have on this matter. What were your thoughts on the scenario that was conceived by The Chosen in order to elucidate the meaning of what Jesus meant when he said, "When you were under the fig tree, I saw you"? What were your thoughts on the scenario? In light of the information presented in The Chosen, what is the specific message that Jesus is attempting to convey to Nathaniel by the use of this statement? What is the precise point that he is seeking to make known to us in addition to his point? Have you ever had the sense of feeling as though you have made a mistake that is so significant that it is comparable to the oversight that Nathaniel might have made? Could it be that you are experiencing God's face being hidden from you and that he is unable to see you? If so, this would be a very interesting experience. During the closing moment of the show, if you were Nathaniel, what feelings do you imagine you would have experienced? Taking a seat with your young people and having a conversation about the gospel is something you should do right now. It is imperative that you do not forget to set aside some time for this. While your children or teenagers are going through situations in which they believe they have damaged their lives, you are more than welcome to join in and reaffirm God's embrace for them while they're going through these experiences. This is something that you are more than willing to do. Say that God has the ability to save us when we are at our lowest point and to revitalize our sense of purpose and direction. Declare that God has the capacity to save us. This statement should be made without fail. The following information is something that I would like to share with you as soon as you have had some time to talk about this. Throughout his entire life, Nathaniel was adamant in his belief that he was destined to construct structures that would bring glory to God. As a result, he devoted a substantial portion of his energies to the pursuit of this calling. He had a strong interest in architecture. When everything came crashing down as a result of his failure, he had the feeling that God had let him down. There was no way out of the situation. Indeed, he got the impression that God had failed him. In point of fact, however, God made use of Nathaniel's failure in order to teach him humility and to redirect his efforts toward the construction of the kingdom of God. By working through Nathaniel's failure, he was able to accomplish this. Dallas Jenkins, the director of The Chosen, revealed to the audience that he had based the story of Nathaniel on his own personal experience. He said that he had developed the plot based on his own experiences. The live webcast of the show was followed by the reveal of this information. From what can be gathered, it would appear that he has been experiencing a desire to make movies throughout the entirety of his life, and he has dedicated a significant percentage of his efforts to chasing that ambition. The fact that his film did not perform well at the box office gave him the impression that God had let him down. He felt as though he had been let down intentionally. There was a simultaneous collapse of everything that was going on around him. In spite of this, God finally used the experience to humble Dallas, and as a consequence, he turned his attention away from making large Hollywood blockbusters and instead worked on developing The Chosen. Without a shadow of a doubt, Nathaniel is not the only character whose life has undergone a significant transformation throughout the course of the story. Obviously, this is something that ought to be obvious to everyone. After going through a life-altering encounter that was very identical to the one that was described earlier, Matthew went through an experience that was virtually exactly the opposite of what was mentioned earlier. When Jesus made his apparition to him during the first season of The Chosen and urged him to go in a completely different direction, his career was already on the rise and headed in a favorable direction. He was called to move in a completely other direction. Matthew is having a difficult time fitting in with the other disciples, despite the fact that he has been called to follow Jesus. In spite of the fact that Matthew has been tasked with following Jesus, this is actually the case. Now is the time to inquire with those who belong to your younger generation. Within the scope of this section, we shall study the many ways in which Matthew, Mary, and Philip work together with Simon. What are the reasons that you believe they have such divergent perspectives about him? Regarding each of their points of view, what are the reasons that support them? Now that Matthew has given up his previous life, you must be thinking what emotions he must be experiencing at this point in his transformation. What kinds of feelings do you think he may be going through, taking into consideration the fact that some followers of Jesus have turned their backs on him because of his prior life? Through the use of the circle illustration, what was Philip seeking to express to Matthew in reference to Jesus? If someone tried to join our youth group but was turned away due to their history, what do you think it would be like for them to be rejected? In your opinion, what do you imagine it would be like? Can you name a few of the possible scenarios that could take place? What do you think it would be like for this group to be a place where people who are located outside of the circle have the idea that they are able to participate in a manner that is significant, that is meaningful to them? In addition to the second episode of the second season of The Chosen, the questions that are asked most frequently concerning the Bible are investigated. How is it that Jesus was able to view Nathaniel from that vantage position when he was sitting beneath the fig tree? The Bible states that when Jesus claims that he saw Nathaniel under the fig tree, John 1 verses 43 to 51, there is no proof to support his claim regarding what Nathaniel was doing under the fig tree or why this assertion was so significant. This is because the Bible does not provide any evidence to support Jesus' claim. There are a few different ways to interpret this line, but one of them is that it is a reference to 1 Kings 4 verse 25, which describes the reign of King Solomon. This interpretation has been interpreted by different people. The phrase Son of God is occasionally attributed to King Solomon, for example, in Psalm 2, and this interpretation has happened on occasion. Has Nathaniel ever given any thought to pursuing a career in architecture? There is no evidence in the Bible that suggests Nathaniel was well known for his construction skills. This is because the Bible does not provide any information that proves this. Throughout the course of The Chosen, Nathaniel is portrayed as an architect due to the circumstances. It is possible that this is done in order to give his character more complexity, and it is possible that this is owing to the fact that the biblical story that concerns him has a reference to Jacob's ladder. Furthermore, it is possible that this is the result of the fact that this is done. Bartholomew is a figure in the book, The Chosen, but who exactly represents him? According to the 3rd verse of Matthew's Gospel, Bartholomew was one of the 12 disciples that Jesus had at the time following him. During a certain period of time, there was a widespread misconception that Bartholomew was a distinct name for either Nathaniel or Nathaniel. Since then, this viewpoint has been disregarded. What is it that you ought to be afraid of? Questions for the introduction to The Chosen, Season 2, Episode 7. We would like to request that one of your younger members read the passage that is supplied below. Look, I'm sending you out into the world like sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore, you must be as smart as serpents and as pure as doves.